There's a lot of diagnoses in the Diagnostical and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. It's really hard to differentiate between all the disorders in the DSM. That is why we continue to have changes and alterations and improvements, because as we learn more about human behavior and the way that the brain works organically or inherently works, and how it processes our life, we realize, as well as things around it, we realize that the brain is way more complex than books really make it. And so we are constantly moving diagnoses around, criteria, and really trying to understand what is going on in human behavior. But things get a little bit more complicated when we start looking at things such as traumatic bonding and shared psychosis. Now, shared psychosis is a diagnosis that is no longer really identified in the DSM-5, which is the most recent book of diagnoses. What has changed in the DSM is some of the criteria as well as some of the definition of shared psychosis. So it no longer has the same feel to it. But I think it's worth me bringing up in this video as we talk about traumatic bonding on this channel before the series is over. So in today's video, I'm going to kind of differentiate what is shared psychosis versus what is traumatic bonding, because both have some overlapping features and can get really confusing. So in today's video, we're going to talk about both traumatic bonding and shared psychosis. But before we jump in, let me briefly introduce myself in case you're new. My name is Tamara. I'm internationally and board certified as a trauma therapist. I'm licensed in mental health. I specialize in treating children, teens, and families, as well as adults who are dealing with trauma. Let's go ahead and jump in. I remember when I started doing psychotherapy right out of graduate school, I was doing an internship, a 2-year to 3-year internship, and I worked in a small clinic in a very congested city area where a lot of the clients were adolescents. They were also college students and young adults just really trying to find out who they are. And I remember stumbling upon this family where the father in the family had the most dominant delusions that anybody ever saw in that clinic. I mean, his delusions were so vast. They were so impactful in the sense that, he really took his delusional beliefs to heart. He believed that the world was ending at the time. And this was back in 2011. Okay, so the world obviously didn't end at that time. But he was under the huge assumption, I should say, that the world was ending. And so he went out, he doubled up on food, he started storing water and flashlights and batteries and, all kind of things, which is smart to have anyway, stored up. But, he really bought these things in a large amount or a large quantity. His purchase totaled $2,500. He brought the receipt in for me to see one session. His beliefs were so extraordinary that, he seemed like he was wise and doing the right thing. And he seemed to be a rather intelligent and thoughtful individual. And that's what's tricky about delusions. He just didn't have all his marbles on the table lined up correctly. And so what would have been seen as a wise and intelligent thing to do soon became an unwise, thing to do. He was under the assumption at the time that, yes, the world was ending, but that it would end in the next 2 months. And so he tried to do all that he could. He spent a lot of his savings. He bought any and everything he wanted to buy. He spent lavishly, let me say. He bought 2 vehicles and had a car note totaling $850 a piece for both of the cars that he bought. He figured, what's the point in going out and splurging? The world is going to end anyway. He was really connected to this delusional belief. And his wife is the one who reached out to me. She's like, Tamara, I need to bring my daughter in. I need to bring my son in. They're twins. and they have been raised watching their father with delusional beliefs, but this is the most extreme delusional belief, and I can't seem to escape this, and I don't want my children to be harmed. Now, here's where things get a little bit tricky, and here's where we start differentiating between traumatic bonding and shared psychosis. Which is now a different terminology, but we're going to get to that in a little bit. She brought her daughter and her son in. They sat with me. We went through all of the details of his delusional beliefs. We went through all of the behaviors, all of the receipts, and a lot of things that he was doing. And we laid it all out on the table, and we looked at it as a team. Mother, the children, and I. We all concluded that his beliefs were unfounded, that there was no proof the world was ending in the next 2 months. I also, with the family, was able to kind of zone in on 3 recent traumas that had happened to him. Lost his mother unexpectedly to cancer, and she went through surgery, and she died in the surgery. 2 or 3 weeks later, his father died, and his father died of a heart attack. After his mother and his father died, then he loses his brother in a tragic car crash. And so after I looked at all of those things with the family, I said, well, here is the trigger entirely for this particular delusional belief. This is something that may be serving a purpose for him unintentionally, and he doesn't know it. So he became very delusional and overprotective and just kind of psychotic, if you will, in the way that he went about his assumption. What he was doing is following his son and his daughter, following his wife to work, not allowing them to go out about and have a good and free life. Shared psychosis, which is now known as, it's under the category of delusional disorder in the DSM. It's also known as induced psychosis and other specified schizophrenia spectrum disorder. Woo, that's a lot to say. Here it is right here on the screen. These are basically the terms for shared psychosis. We no longer have shared psychosis in the DSM. It's under these terms right here on the screen. So I proceeded to obtain some information from his PCP, obtain some information from his therapist, and obtain some information from a crisis center that he had called when he had suicidal thoughts. And I put all the pieces together, and then I issued, because he became my client, I issued a diagnosis of induced psychosis or other specified schizophrenia spectrum disorder. And so I remember speaking to him under firm consultation and supervision, because I needed it myself to figure out how to navigate him. And I remember talking to him, and here's what he did. He ended up convincing his wife and his children that the world was ending. His children began stocking up on things. His children began really imprisoning themselves, refusing to go out with their peers, refusing to go to school. The wife became the same way. So I not only had the father who was engaging in psychotic behavior and beliefs and delusional beliefs, but now I had both both children, and then I also had the wife as well who fell prey to his delusional beliefs. Here's where shared psychosis or induced psychosis or delusional disorder kind of sucks you in. And this is something I want you guys to ask yourself. Has there been a situation in your life where, you're a little bit torn between traumatic bonding and delusional disorder, or sharing some psychotic beliefs of the person that is dominant in your life? And because this father was dominant over his children, because this father was dominant with his wife, and they were a Christian family, so they believed in the traditional let the man lead, they fell prey to this induced psychosis. Mom became psychotic in her beliefs, not that she had an illness, she just became very fixed and very firm in her beliefs, and so did the twin. So delusional material from the dominant person is usually that it's material that doesn't make sense, right? Outside of the belief system. It's the proof for that, right? And so the dominant person in a unit or in a family system is the one who kind of passes on the delusional material and cause the shared psychosis among other people. Now, here's what can happen. Induced psychosis, shared psychosis, other specified psychosis, whatever you want to call it. It's all about the same, okay? This particular illness here is tricky because the dominant person in this system, or in a relationship with somebody else, right? Your father, your boyfriend, your husband, your wife, your aunt, your cousin, whoever. The dominant personality of this individual is such that it sucks you in so much that you begin showing signs of psychosis yourself. It doesn't necessarily mean that you are psychotic clinically and that you need treatment or medication. It just means that this dominant person sucked you into their psychotic existence and their mindset, and so therefore you become a victim of their psychotic view of the world. So there's a couple of things that you are likely to do. Before we get into that, let me just do a brief overview of traumatic bonding. Now, traumatic bonding is very similar to induced psychosis, and here's what happens. Traumatic bonding is, I know that I'm being abused by this person. I know this person can be a loving, caring, supportive person, and so now I'm stuck between two views of them. I'm not exactly sure which view is the correct view. And so therefore, I'm going to cling to this person, and I'm going to cling only to their positive attributes. And I'm going to drop all that negative stuff because I can't make sense out of it. And in order to survive emotionally and psychologically, I'm going to cling to those good sides of that person. I'm going to drop the bad stuff, and I'm going to continue to move forward with this person in my life. And here's the behaviors that you are likely to engage in with either induced psychosis or shared psychosis, as it was formerly known as, and traumatic bonding. So here's likely what you're going to do. One, you're going to cover up and justify. It's so much easier to cover up and justify a person who is unhealthy, whether that person is delusional or psychotic or not. Being able to cover up what they're doing, cover up their illness, cover their belief system, whatever it is, you're going to cover it up, and you may also find yourself justifying it. Now, let's say, for example, this is a family member who, has harmed you, and you don't know how to get away from them, I should say, and you don't know how to get outside of the way that they are, right? Let's say this is your father, for example. There's a side of you that loves your father and wants to give him a chance, and yet there's another side of you that doesn't like your father and sees him as a complete narcissist. So you may have a hard time competing with those different views of your father, and so or juggling, I should say, maybe those two sides of your father. And so in this scenario, you might find yourself covering up some of the ugly things that he does, covering up some of the abuse, covering up some of the manipulation that he engages in. And if someone comes to you about his behavior, you may even find yourself justifying all of his actions and behaviors. Okay, so that's an example of covering up and justifying. The next thing that you're likely to do, if you're kind of sucked into this difficult place in your mind and in your heart, you might realize that your boundaries are really poor. It's hard to maintain appropriate boundaries when you are in a trauma bond, when you are in induced psychosis, because you are seeing the world through that delusional person's eyes, right? So it's like seeing the world through a pair of glasses that belongs to that person that you are in relationship with. And so it's hard for you to see outside of that. So your boundaries may be really, really poor. It may be porous or fluid, meaning that you go with the flow and you find yourself kind of moving around in your boundaries. And even though you may set a boundary, you may find yourself move a little bit and give a little bit, right? It's very difficult sometimes to figure out what your boundaries should be when you're in an induced psychosis, or if you're in a delusional type of relationship with this person, or you are dealing with traumatic bonding. The next thing that you're likely to see in yourself is defensiveness. Now, I've talked about this right here in this video. If you want to go check that out, learn a little bit more about traumatic bonding. But defensiveness is something that's likely to happen. It's likely to happen especially with others that come against that person that you are trapped with. Right? So let's say, for example, we use the example of the father. Let's say, because you can't figure out what side of your father to see and cling to and believe. Okay, let's say that that's you and you're struggling with that. Maybe one of your family members, extended family members, grandma, aunt, cousin, may come to you and say, you know what? I've seen you with your dad and it seems like A, B, and C. Okay. And you might find yourself, depending on how imprisoned or attached to the belief that you are with your father, for example, you may find yourself say to the person, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't do that, right? My dad's perfectly fine. We have a wonderful relationship. You may start to see yourself put up such high walls that you are not able to let go and be honest and truthful with yourself. You're very defensive. And that's a sign that you're either in a shared psychosis or induced psychosis, I should say, or in a traumatic bond. Fear of leaving. You may find yourself feeling very afraid, not knowing what life is going to be like on the other side of that trauma bond, not knowing what life is going to be on the other side of that psychosis, right? Or that delusional system that you are a part of. You don't realize, I should say, that on the other side of that person you're traumatically bonded to, on the other side of that person who's delusional, there is a better world. There is a more clear world. There's a balanced world. You don't know that because all you know is the instability. And so you stay kind of attached to that because there is no proof for you, perhaps, that the other side is better, right? So you stick to where you are. You may also find yourself refusing to leave the person that you're traumatically bonded to. It's a lot easier to just stay put, do nothing, learn to be okay with where you are and not complain. Don't push, don't fight, nothing. Just stay still where you're at. So you may feel your heart refusing to get out, right? Also too, claiming that, it's not the right time, or they need me, or I was always there for them. I can't leave them. All of those things should be evaluated, right? Why are we claiming these things? Is it fear? Is it anxiety? Is it you want to give this person a chance? Is it you don't want to say goodbye? Is it your idea of what that relationship should be, right? These are all therapeutic questions that you want to be able to ask yourself, right? So shared psychosis or induced psychosis, delusional disorder, other specified schizophrenia disorder, and traumatic bonding can have a lot of overlapping features. And it's important to learn what the distinction is between traumatic bonding and delusional disorder or induced psychosis. Guys, I will come back to this channel and do more videos on this. If you want to learn more about this dynamic, let me know in the comment section below. Thank you so much for being with me today in this video. Go ahead and give that subscribe button a bump, a boop, a subscribe, whatever. And the bell button so that every time that I post a video, a live chat, a story, whatever, you will be the first to know. I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.